Right now, somewhere on this planet, two people are falling for each other. Maybe it started with eye contact across a room. Maybe it started with a joke that landed just right. It feels personal. It feels like choice. But underneath that moment, something far older than either of them is quietly running the whole show. A system that took hundreds of millions of years to build, long before humans existed, long before flowers existed, long before anything on Earth had a face. To understand why humans do what they do, you have to go back further than humans. Far further. Sexual reproduction itself is estimated to have evolved somewhere around 1.2 billion years ago in simple, single-celled organisms. Before that, life mostly copied itself. One cell split into two identical cells, over and over, generation after generation, with almost no variation. It worked, but it was fragile. A single harmful mutation or a single new disease could wipe out an entire population because every individual was nearly a clone of every other. Sexual reproduction changed that. By combining genetic material from two sources instead of one, organisms could produce offspring that were different from both parents. More variation meant more chances that some offspring would survive a changing environment. It wasn't romantic. It was a survival algorithm. That algorithm eventually built its way up through fish, reptiles, birds, and mammals, refining itself billions of times over. And somewhere inside that long chain sits every ancestor you've ever had. But here's the part that surprises people. The biological mechanics of reproduction are ancient. The emotional experience wrapped around it in humans is something else entirely, and it evolved for a very different reason. Anthropologist Helen Fisher spent decades studying the biology of human attraction and pair bonding, and her research helped separate what looks like one experience into three distinct systems. Lust, driven largely by hormones like testosterone and estrogen. Attraction, driven by dopamine and norepinephrine, the same chemicals involved in focus and reward. And attachment, driven by oxytocin and vasopressin, the hormones tied to long-term bonding. Fisher's work suggested these three systems evolved somewhat independently, which is why someone can feel deep attachment to one person while still experiencing attraction to someone else entirely. The systems aren't malfunctioning. They were never fully unified to begin with. So why would evolution build attachment at all? If the entire goal was just reproduction, lust alone would have been enough. This is where human evolution takes a strange turn compared to most of the animal kingdom. Paleoanthropologist Owen Lovejoy proposed an influential idea sometimes called the provisioning model. Human infants are born extraordinarily helpless compared to almost any other primate. A newborn chimpanzee can cling to its mother's fur within hours. A human infant can't even lift its own head. That helplessness comes from a trade-off. Human brains grew large very quickly in evolutionary terms, but human hips could only widen so much before walking upright became difficult. So human babies had to be born earlier in their development, essentially unfinished, requiring years of intensive care afterward. That created an enormous problem for early human mothers. Raising a slow-developing infant while also finding food and staying alert to predators was, biologically speaking, nearly impossible alone. Lovejoy's theory suggests pair bonding may have evolved as a solution to exactly that problem. A partner who stuck around to help provide food and protection dramatically increased the odds that a helpless infant would survive to adulthood. Under that pressure, attachment wasn't a poetic bonus layered on top of biology. It may have been a survival strategy every bit as practical as opposable thumbs. This reframes the entire question. Sex itself is ancient, tracing back over 1 billion years. But the emotional glue that makes humans want to stay connected to one specific person may be a much more recent invention. shaped specifically by the unique challenge of raising an unusually helpless human infant. Evolutionary psychologist David Buss has spent much of his career studying how these ancient pressures still shape modern mate preferences. His research across dozens of cultures found strikingly consistent patterns in what people report valuing in long-term partners. Patterns that show up across wildly different societies, economies, and belief systems. That consistency suggests these preferences aren't purely cultural inventions. They carry the fingerprints of pressures that shaped human ancestors long before agriculture, long before cities, long before anyone had ever written the word love. Which brings us to the modern moment. Today, dating happens through apps. Attraction gets filtered through profile photos and algorithms. Attachment gets built through years of shared apartments, calendars, and inside jokes. It feels completely unlike anything your ancestors experienced. But underneath all of that modern packaging, the same three ancient systems are still running. Lust still spikes with the same hormones it did in early humans. Dopamine still floods your brain during the early, obsessive stage of a new attraction. The same neurochemical reward pathway involved in almost any other pleasurable behavior. And oxytocin still builds slowly in the background of long-term partnerships, quietly reinforcing the bond every time you feel safe with someone. You are not choosing a partner in a vacuum. You're running software that was field-tested for over 1 million years, long before anyone called it romance. That's what makes the question, when did humans start having sex, so misleading. It sounds like it's asking about a single moment, a light switch flipped on at some specific point in prehistory. But the real story is layered. Reproduction itself is over 1 billion years old. Human-specific attraction chemistry is hundreds of thousands of years old. And the specific cultural rituals humans wrap around sex and romance today, dating, marriage, courtship customs, are almost impossibly recent by comparison. Some barely a few thousand years old, a fraction of the timeline that built the underlying biology. So the next time you feel that jolt of attraction across a crowded room, or the quiet comfort of curling up next to someone you trust, know that you're not experiencing something new. You're experiencing the latest software update running on hardware that was built over hundreds of millions of years, shaped by helpless infants who needed protecting, by ancestors who needed each other to survive, and by a billion-year-old algorithm that first discovered mixing 2 sets of genetic material was better than making an endless line of identical copies. Right now, somewhere on this planet, 2 people are falling for each other. It feels personal. It feels like choice. But it's also one of the oldest stories life has ever told. Still being told, right now, through you.